Attention, prends pas pour moi, passager très spécial en transit. VIP. Most important person to me. Disparaître à ses yeux, ne plus donner signe. Avant de ne plus pouvoir revenir en arrière. Avant qu'il soit trop tard. Sais-tu que je suis seule, que tu veux pas. Savais-tu que je suis seule, que tu veux pas.
Hi, Vinyl community, it's Chris on the Vinyl Transmission channel. Today I want to talk about Françoise Hardy. I'm going to show you albums that range from a time period of 1962 all the way to 2012. That's 50 years of recorded music, starting in Paris. She recorded in London. And so to look at her music is the history of recorded music. It's the history of record labels. And you know, she's directly connected early in her career to people who worked with Elvis Presley. She worked with Burt Bacharach. Jimmy Page was one of the session players at some of her musical recordings. And so just an absolutely amazing history. And her music is so special. It's so Françoise Hardy. It's so interior to her. If you like things that are just emotional and beautiful, you know, without apology, that's Françoise Hardy. You know, she's an absolute antithesis of what I don't like about modern singing, which is that everything is a powerhouse display of virtuosity, endlessly embellished, endlessly ornate, and dramatic and oversold. She has never oversung anything. And so we're going to look at her music all 50 years, 7 inches. We're going to look at 12 inches. We're going to look at CDs. And we're going to look at the different eras, because she is often, if she's mentioned, they mention her debut, which is an amazing debut, but the information kind of falls away after that, partly because she is such a sort of a private person and so dedicated to the French language. Even biographical information in English is hard to come by. So let's get started. I'm going to show you here the earliest 7-inch single that I have. And this is kind of neat. On the back of here, this third song down in blue, the last name there, she ended up marrying that gentleman like 8 years later, and kind of neat. It's part of the history of the recordings and so forth. But here is the jukebox tag on here, which is really neat. This is the record label that you'll see on all her early records. So this is the Vogue label. And so it looks like that on both 12-inch and 7-inch. These are beautiful recordings. You know, this was influenced by popular French music and the beginnings of American Motown, Phil Spector sound, Elvis Presley. Those are all the Burt Bacharach, those early pioneers of that sound. That's what she was directly involved in. Early in her career, she recorded in France, but quickly moved to London, even during these Vogue years. That's where she was recording these, which is where the Kinks were recording, where Jimmy Page was a studio musician. And so she worked with someone who went on to arrange for Elvis Presley. Some of the material is influenced, going for some of the sounds from that period, and yet it's always distinctly her. And so that's what's just kind of fascinating. So let me skip and just show you the 50-year mark here, just to get started. So this was released in 2012, and this is really wonderful. This is a beautiful picture disc, and the packaging on this is amazing. This 7-inch, I love the cover, and these pictures kind of falling apart are an interesting commentary on. It'll make sense as we go, but she was a highly photographed woman in the 1960s, and that's barely really describing it. She was such a hit. She was one of the first women in France to wear a miniskirt, and that caught up a lot of attention. And one of the things that made her stand out, this is the debut 12-inch. This is the original issue. And if we look at this, the cover, what I've read about it in the context of the time period is, her hair is not sprayed down, it's natural. Having the umbrella implying rain is sort of the melancholy thing that she has become known for. I think it's just true to who she is. It's sort of a quiet beauty, a thoughtful type of music that she does, an introverted music even, if you will. So anyway, that's why this is kind of so iconic. It's kind of amazing, just the casualness of her demeanor, and of course her beautiful image on there as well. So that is an amazing record. It really is. It just holds the test of time. Now, it's nothing more essentially than her first 3 7-inch singles compiled. So why don't I go ahead and show you now the rest of the 7 inches that I have from that era. Is that cover amazing with the headphones and combining the record label on the headphones there? That's just a graphic, but it really just works perfectly. These are some of the most beautiful pictures that I think you'll ever see on records. These are all excellent. They're different sessions, they're singles. Sometimes there are outside writers. Mostly it's her, but not always, as the writer. But certainly her choice of material is impeccable. So that is the 7 inches that I have from the early years. So let me talk now about, we'll look at the early albums, and then we'll move on from there. I want to mention this. This is the CD version of it. This is a record company, Light in the Attic, and they are now reissuing the first 5 major records from her, which haven't been reissued on vinyl or CD ever, I think, in some cases. And so they did a really great treatment with these. This just came out like a month ago, and this has excellent liner notes that really gives the history of the sessions and so forth. This has an incredible charm, but as I hope to show you in this video, there's a lot more to her than just this debut album. These CDs, I'm going to show you the first 5. This is the inside. They're going to be reissued on vinyl in January, and I've already pre-ordered it. So the CDs came out first, and I'm very happy with them. They sound fantastic, and needless to say, I'm really looking forward to having the vinyl on all of these. This is her second major album, and when I say major album, I'm sort of qualifying it that way because right from the start, they started sort of repackaging her music, putting it, reissuing it in different languages. So it's very confusing to sort of say what's what. Even the concept of a studio, of a full-length album was hardly in place. An album was merely a collection of singles. It wasn't a thought in itself. And one of the reasons she is so fascinating is that she was one of the people who sort of was a very early singer-songwriter, and making an album that was a personal statement that was meant to be listened to in its whole. She's at the very earliest of that. This is a beautiful record. It is moves right along from that first album. It's not like, oh, did we recapture the sound? Pop music is being invented as this is happening. So these are a lot with an orchestra, different bands at the time. Meaning whatever the arrangement called for, that's what they would do. If it needed an orchestra, if it needed backup singers. The first record is really heavy on bass, and some of the musicianship is kind of mediocre, but it just kind of adds to the charm. This is the third. There really is a lot of information in here, which is wonderful. There's also a lot of hype, so it is a little tedious to read through, but they did an amazing job of actually, if you dig through it, they really do talk about the sessions and give you a lot of great information that expands your appreciation of it. So those first three records really hang together as a group. Here, she's becoming even more individualized. This is an amazing cover. And this one has a little bit of a psychedelic party feel in places, along with her regular sort of romantic balladry, her Françoise Hardy music. This is really cool. If there were one of these first five other than the debut, and you wanted something that was really cool, you're a fan of the Beatles, you want to hear something a little bit psychedelic even, a little bit of Kinks, a little bit of Beatles mixed in, this is probably the only place you're going to get that in the 60s period. Here is the number 5, and so this concludes the Paris years. This is wonderful. This is back towards the direction of her usual material of ballads and mid-paced songs. This is a wonderful record, but it's definitely it's definitely stepping out of that party music that might be how you describe some of her the early scene that she came out of. So wow, that was a ton of music. Those are just great. There are so many, I'm not saying that every song is a 10, but every performance of hers is pretty close to a 10, and many of the songs are wonderful. And they're just incredibly nice to put on and listen to. They're just very listenable. This is a compilation of the Vogue years. And just to show this is really quite good. It's a 2 CD set. It pretty much takes you through all of the Paris years if you only wanted them on a 2 CD set. And it has some of the singles and the information. So that's a nice collection. So before we move on to the 70s, which is when things get continue to be interesting and change and moves into a second era, let me talk about her recording in different languages. This is an album in Italian, and when she first started, essentially, they were quick to make sure that she recorded in Italian, that she recorded in German, that she recorded in English. And some of those are harder to find than others. This is essentially, I think, her second album, but this is not the classic cover, the original cover. This is a recent reissue, as you can see. But it is beautiful. It's wonderful to hear her singing in Italian. It's wonderful to hear her singing in every language. And this is nice. It's a short record, as many of her records are, and I guess that's probably true of most everything from that era. So here is a CD collection called, what is this called? Midnight Blues. And this is the London sessions, and Paris and London 68 to 72. And this is some really great killer music. This is all in English. It's very moody. It's about 3 albums on here collected together. I don't have any of these on vinyl. I definitely prefer her French music, but this material that she chose for this is just impeccable. The songs are so moody. They're so great. I'll show you the thing that is probably at the top of my want list, and that would be this record, which is sometimes called Love Songs, and is on the Kundalini label. But this one is just a great collection of the English material. These are some of the covers. Those and this, I guess, are essentially the albums that those are drawn from. She covers Neil Young. It's absolutely really great music. So here, and I'll change the record in just a second, this is her singing in German. And man, if you thought her singing in French was sexy, hearing her sing in German is great. This is being a CD reissue, has more than just what was originally done, has material from the 80s, has her singing a song called VIP that is one of my favorite songs of hers from the 80s, and that's a real kick. So this is a nice compilation as well. I don't have anything of her singing in German on vinyl. Okay, we're going to get right into the 70s after a brief stop here to show you this. This is a record label called Four Corners of the World. And this is that Paris material re-put together for the American market. So some of them have the same album covers, the songs get rearranged. So this is, I don't know what to say. They're, they're not as interesting as the original ones, but if they're in, if they're in good quality, they're still great. But this is the one record label of hers that I might skip on, only because they may be reissued on higher quality labels otherwise, and they're just repackaging of the original French records. So that's going to take us into the 70s, where she really becomes a singer-songwriter in the classic sense that we think of it today. And there's a great CD set. This has 5 albums. It takes you from the late 60s into the early 70s. And this is the earliest one. These are just pastoral and beautiful. Her singing is so amazing, the choice of material. And you hear her experimenting and evolving. I like this because this is sort of the final transition out of the Paris style. And here, especially with this album cover, you can see this doesn't have anything to do with party music at this point. This album cover tells you that this is a different sort of thing, doesn't it? This is from 1970. I don't have any of these on vinyl. And as I said, they're all really, really good. So that is some of the early material in the 70s. I'll go ahead and show you. This is a single from the 70s. This is on a record label called Sonopress, if I'm saying that right. This is the only record label of that I have of hers. So I'm really glad to have this one. Beautiful song. This is from another album in the 70s called Message Personal, essentially. And this is from a reissue box set that is pretty spectacular. And I'll talk about that, I guess, in just a second here. This is the label on that. So it was a box set that had several CDs, a 7-inch LP, which we just looked at, and then also a reissue of this album, which I think is one of the things she seems to be the most proud of. And it really is a fantastic record. It has, you can tell that it's just what she wanted it to be, because the arrangements are just very particular. And the last song is really a classic of hers. I would definitely recommend checking out the song by the title of this album. So that is, I think, 73, 74. This is available. This was in my box set, but you can get this separately. This is like a 2 CD set of that album. And on the box set that I have, it has some very, very impossible to find live recordings of Françoise Hardy, because she stopped performing live before the end of the 60s. She's a quiet singer. She's not a person to go belting out auditoriums, and that isn't what she wanted to do. The live recordings are really nice because they're her performing, you can tell, in a very small space. And I can just tell you that it leaves you no doubt about the specialness of her voice. It's certainly not something that's created in the studio, although that's how she has chosen to really express herself musically. So this is also from the 70s. And we're going to talk about the albums here in a second. Okay, actually that skipped ahead, so I'm going to put that one down. That's like 1980. So let's talk about the other albums in the 70s. This is such a beautiful, I'd call it like a, if the modern word, it's just a chill out. It's just it's just wonderful. It's a great record from her. Very quiet for the most part. This one, you'll hear sometimes people talk about her, her disco years and so forth. Some of that might be on that previous one, but they definitely would be talking about this one as well. But that really gives it short shrift. This, again, has such a quiet, peaceful interior space along with the disco. And it sounds like her to me, and it's just a fantastic record. And let's see here. Okay, so now we're going to get into the 80s, which is one of my favorite eras of hers. It's one of my favorite record labels that I'll show you. A record label called Flair Nosh, which I think is a German label. And let's start with this, because this is just before that record label. And I love this record cover. In the early years, when they repackaged her early album, the one with the crate, they have the picture of her in the crate, and they called it Made in Paris. So I kind of think of this as a commentary on her domestic life, because I think at this point she's married and with a kid. So she's no longer in a crate being shipped to London and America. Now she's in a refrigerator with her music. So kind of a sly commentary on her music and her situation. That record is pretty wild. There's a song on here called Jazzy Retro Satanists, which is one of the strangest titles I've ever heard. And it's her at her most frantic. I mean, that's almost frenetic. That wouldn't be the first thing I recommend that you dig into on her, but I really like it, as I do, all of her material. So this is that song that I just mentioned, and this is the 7-inch single, and this is the only one I think that I have that is on this record label. So now we're going to talk about the Flair Nosh years, the 1980 to 1990. Amazing output from the 80s from her. I just love it. If you like Kate Bush, if you like Peter Gabriel, if you like other things that are sort of just quintessentially 80s, that just have a sound, have a magic to them, she did a whole decade of great material. It's not as dramatic or as conceptual as those other artists. I mean, she's sort of she's basically singing songs that are poems of her life. and her story. And so, you know, her ambitions weren't to take over the radio, but nevertheless, she was always innovating and dealing with the modern music, incorporating that into what she did. So this is the earliest record. This is actually a Japanese press. This is the first one. This was on the Flair Nosh label. And this has that 80s sound. It's a little bit looking forward, a little bit looking back, and is probably the one from the era that is the least consistent. I really like it, but the other ones you can listen to the whole way through and really get a coherent statement. That one is a little more, you know, going to be everything that she's interested in as a singer, but doesn't, you know, maybe congeal as an LP for the you know, average listening experience. This is another 12-inch on the Flair Nosh label. And let's look at those record labels because they're pretty neat. This is what it looks like on 12-inch. Isn't that funny? And this is what it looks like on the 7-inch. Why don't I go ahead and show you all the singles? I think I have 8 from this era. There's that album that we just saw, a single from it. Here is that one. These are all on the same record label. There's just a beauty and an airiness to the 80s material, a happiness. It sounds like a happy time in her life, and it conveys in the music. Love this song, love this single. We'll look at the LP here in just a second. It's good old Flair Nosh label. This is a beautiful song from probably my favorite album of hers of the 80s. This is love this single. This is just really cool. This is one of the things that really hooked me into just loving her stuff no matter what era when I heard this one. This is the last one that I have on the Flair Nosh label. I'll show you something interesting. I'm glad I thought of it. Do you see this? This is she worked with this guy before he started the record label that would carry Saxon, among other things. But he was around, I forget in what capacity, but he's mentioned in the liner notes of the Paris year. So that connection goes pretty deep. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the final vinyls from the 80s. This is kind of neat because this pulls on the earlier material from the decade and adds a couple new singles. So this is, in format, is kind of like what the early records were. So that kind of is neat, because otherwise you're not going to get this song, VIP, on a 12-inch vinyl. This album, I would highly recommend this if you like an 80s sound. This is just absolutely fantastic from start to finish. This is just beautiful. Great, great record. That is also on the Flair Nosh label. And I'll show you this because those records aren't common. This is a CD compilation of those years. And so it's 3 albums and several singles on 2 CDs. And this is outstanding. I really love this. If you're curious about that, if the 80s era sounds like something that's interesting to you, this is just so high quality. There's only a couple songs that are missing from the LPs, but they've added all the additional singles. So just an absolute powerhouse of a compilation. So we're going to move in here towards the end. I know I've been talking a long time. I'm going to put in the notes maybe some videos, maybe a playlist, a couple of things to just show off if you want to explore, make it a little bit more easy. And please, if you put something in the comment or ask any questions, anything I didn't show, I want. So now that we're done with the 80s, We're going to move into 1990 until 2012 and show what's been happening since then, which of course one of the things that happened is that vinyl fell off the face of the earth. So this album was never even issued on vinyl. And this is basically a rock album and is really excellent. Has a little bit of the 80s vibe to it, but is much more rock and roll. It's the only thing like it in her catalog. And if you own a record company, please put that out on vinyl. That is one that I'm sure would just sound amazing on vinyl. This is another late album. This one apparently is never issued on a CD. These are sort of smoother in their, if you think of Leonard Cohen's backup music, which is sort of kind of slick and just sort of stays in the background to let the vocal happen. That's kind of what these later albums are like. This is the one that we're listening to now, which is really amazing. It has duets with Iggy Pop as well as her husband. And I have this on vinyl. This is called Parentheses. This one is really great as well. The later albums are a kind of a little darker. They're very moody and just very personal, but they're beautiful. This one, according to Discogs, does have a vinyl issue, but there's no picture of it or record of it being sold. But if that does exist on vinyl, I would just love to have that. And then here is the 2012 album, which has some really beautiful packaging. And I'll show you the vinyl. So that's from 2012 all the way back to 1962. She's an amazing artist. If you love vocals, if you love good songwriting, her music, although it is sometimes called melancholy or sad, it does not leave me with that feeling. She has such an eye and an ear for beauty and the arrangements and her material that it's a beautiful feeling that you come away with. It's not a sad feeling. And I like people like Leonard Cohen and Nick Drake and other things, but I don't listen to that stuff because it does kind of bring me down. And that's not the feeling with her. So, Françoise Hardy, please comment and subscribe. Be happy to talk with you endlessly about her material and the different eras that she has. Thank you so much for watching. Be well and take care, VC. Bye.